Gillian Maxwell is found guilty of recruiting and trafficking teenage girls for abuse. The British socialite procured the girls for convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. She faces the rest of her life behind bars.
No matter who you are, no matter what kinds of circles you traveled in, no matter how much money you have, no matter how many years have passed since the sexual abuse, justice is still possible.
We'll be live in New York with the latest. Also on the programme, coronavirus surge hubs are being set up at hospitals in England to deal with the potential increase in admissions caused by record cases of the Omicron variant. Warnings to those in Scotland and Wales not to travel to England for the new year to take advantage of looser COVID restrictions. House prices across the UK rise by more than 10% in a year, but a leading lender suggests a slowdown is coming. And a make or break moment for the new James Webb telescope on its thrilling mission to capture the light from the first ever stars. Good afternoon. The British socialite Gillian Maxwell has been found guilty of recruiting and trafficking young girls to be sexually abused by the late American financier Jeffrey Epstein. The 60-year-old was found guilty on 5 of the 6 counts she faced, including the most serious charge, that of sex trafficking a minor. Maxwell faces spending the rest of her life in prison after she was found guilty by a jury in New York. But her lawyers say they're already preparing to appeal against the conviction. Our North America correspondent Lee McBull reports.
Court sketches show the moment Gillian Maxwell's victims have waited decades for. After 5 days of deliberation, jurors decided she was guilty on 5 counts linked to the sexual abuse of teenagers. And it was 4 of her victims who helped put her behind bars. The court heard how Gillian Maxwell gained their trust. During their emotional testimony, they told the jury how she instructed them to give the late Jeffrey Epstein massages that turned sexual. All but one testified anonymously, using a pseudonym or just their first name. Jane said Maxwell participated in her encounters with Epstein. "I was terrified and felt gross and ashamed. When you're 14, you have no idea what's going on," she said. Kate said after meeting Epstein, Maxwell asked her if she had fun, saying she was such a good girl and one of his favourites. And Annie Farmer, the only victim who publicly identified herself, said Gillian Maxwell gave her an unsolicited massage. She said, "I so badly wanted to get off the table and have the massage be done." She's now said she's relieved at the verdict and that it shows even those with great power and privilege will be held accountable when they sexually abuse the young. Defence lawyers attacked the accuser's memories and motives, but that ultimately didn't help Gillian Maxwell.
We firmly believe in Gillian's innocence. Obviously, we are very disappointed with the verdict. We have already started working on the appeal, and we are confident that she will be vindicated.
Well, Gillian Maxwell will be sentenced at a later date, but it seems extremely likely that she'll spend the rest of her life behind bars. A final fall from grace for the British former socialite, who a jury here has decided wasn't just a bystander to the crimes of Jeffrey Epstein, but was herself a predator and an active participant in the sexual abuse of teenagers. Police raids of Epstein's homes showed the duo's jet-setting, luxurious lifestyle. In this photo, the pair are seen relaxing at the Queen's Balmoral residence when Prince Andrew reportedly invited the couple to the estate. The staggering wealth on display from their opulent properties only highlighted how they used their power together over the years to lure, intimidate and silence everyone around them. House rules, including this manual, told staff to be deaf, dumb and blind, forbidding them from making eye contact with Epstein.
One of my clients said to me that she's been living in a metaphorical prison all of these years with the psychological fallout of the sexual abuse, the deep shame and embarrassment and trauma that she's experienced. And now Gillian Maxwell is going to experience a real prison where she will have a lot of time to think about the profound damage that she has caused to so many girls and young women.
Gillian Maxwell still faces a second trial for perjury, a charge which she denies. Aleem Maqbool, BBC News in New York.
Let's go live to New York now and speak to our correspondent, Nomia Iqbal. Nomia, this has been a huge moment for her accusers.
It really has. One of the women that testified against Maxwell during the trial, Annie Farmer, who publicly identified herself, had said that she was relieved, and you hear that word a lot, relief, by the women that testified in the trial, but also by the accusers as well. This was a day that they were long hoping for. Bear in mind that Epstein and Maxwell had been under suspicion for a long time. After Epstein killed himself in jail 2 years ago, the spotlight fell on Maxwell. The FBI eventually tracked her down at her home here in the US in New Hampshire, where she was arrested on multiple charges. But she maintained her innocence throughout. She said her defence was that she did not know that Epstein was up to any of this, that he had hid aspects of his life from her, that she was manipulated by him as well. She had an opportunity to take to the stand and defend herself during the trial, but she refused, saying that she did not believe that the government had proven the charges against her beyond a reasonable doubt. And even now, the family who were here throughout, her 4 siblings, released that statement last night after the verdict, saying that they believe she will ultimately be vindicated. We're not quite sure on what basis the defence will appeal on. But just to let you know, we were in and out of court and saw the proceedings, and one of the concerns the defence had was that the jurors might be rushed into a verdict. It is a holiday season here, but also you've got the rise of Omicron cases. But the jury didn't rush. They took their time. They even asked to re-examine some of the testimonies from the witnesses, including all the women that testified during this trial. And they returned their verdict, finding the former British socialite guilty on 4 of those 5 charges. 5, sorry.
Nomia, thank you very much. Nomia Iqbal in New York. Well, the trial of Ghislaine Maxwell is just one of the court cases in the US arising from the activities of the disgraced banker Jeffrey Epstein, who died in prison after being charged with sex trafficking. The other is a civil lawsuit by Virginia Giuffre, formerly known as Virginia Roberts, against Prince Andrew, alleging sexual assault. Prince Andrew has always strongly denied her claims. Our royal correspondent Nicholas Witchell reports.
Caught by the camera in this now infamous photograph, on the left Prince Andrew, in the centre the then 17-year-old Virginia Roberts, and on the right, smiling for the camera, Ghislaine Maxwell. Andrew's friendship with Ghislaine Maxwell goes back more than 20 years. Here he is with her at Royal Ascot in June 2000. At the time, she was Jeffrey Epstein's girlfriend. Epstein was there as well. He too was a guest of Prince Andrew at Royal Ascot. Andrew spoke about his friendship with Epstein and his girlfriend, Ghislaine Maxwell, in his Newsnight interview.
In 2000, Epstein was a guest at Windsor Castle and at Sandringham. He was brought right into the heart of the royal family at your invitation.
But certainly at my invitation, not at the royal family's invitation. But remember that it was his girlfriend that was the key element in this. He was the, as it were, +1 to some extent in that aspect.
Am I right in thinking you threw a birthday party for Epstein's girlfriend, Ghislaine Maxwell, at Sandringham?
No, it was a shooting weekend.
A shooting weekend?
Just a straightforward shooting weekend.
Racing at Ascot, shooting at Sandringham, and a trip to Balmoral. This photograph, an exhibit at Maxwell's trial in New York, shows Epstein and Maxwell relaxing at the Queen's Balmoral estate. They were there at Andrew's invitation. Andrew categorically denies knowing of any improper activities by Epstein or anyone else. His lawyers are mounting a robust defence against the civil lawsuit brought against him in New York by Virginia Roberts, or Virginia Giuffre as she is now. In a submission to the court, Andrew's legal team say the case should be dismissed. They say the allegations against him are baseless and motivated by Giuffre's desire for a payday at his expense. Whatever the truth of those allegations, it's clear that Andrew had a long-lasting friendship with Ghislaine Maxwell. It was to her that Andrew turned when Virginia Roberts' allegations surfaced. In January 2015, Andrew emailed Maxwell, "Let me know when we can talk. Got some specific questions to ask you about Virginia Roberts," he wrote. To which Maxwell replied, "Have some info, call me when you have a moment." However, by the time Andrew did his interview with Newsnight, he seemed to want to distance himself from his old friend.
If there are questions that Ghislaine has to answer, that's her problem. I'm afraid I'm not in a position to be able to comment one way or the other.
A court in New York has now delivered its verdicts on Gillian Maxwell. In a few weeks, another court in New York will consider the civil lawsuit against Prince Andrew brought by Virginia Giuffre. Andrew's lawyers will once again plead his innocence of any impropriety. Nicholas Witchell, BBC News.
Coronavirus surge hubs are being set up at NHS hospitals in England to deal with a potential increase in admissions caused by record daily cases of the Omicron coronavirus variant. 8 sites will be able to treat around 100 patients each. It comes as the Health Secretary, Sajid Javid, has said the supply of lateral flow tests will be tripled in January and February to try to combat shortages. Here's our health correspondent, Sophie Hutchinson.
St George's Hospital in southwest London, where workers started to build a Nightingale hub. It's one of 8 hospitals in England which will have these temporary units aimed at caring for around 100 COVID patients.
There's great concern within the NHS and within government now that the number of cases is growing so fast that we have to plan for a scenario whereby the NHS cannot, in its current format, cope with those cases. I think the big concern is where do the staff come from to man those beds.
There are also plans to make a further 4,000 beds available in other places if needed. In a statement, the Health Secretary said, "We hope the Nightingale surge hubs at hospitals will not have to be used, but it is absolutely right that we prepare for all scenarios and increase capacity." Cases of COVID-19 have been increasing sharply across the UK, with the past week showing more than a 40% rise over the previous one. But many are still finding it hard to get tested. Well, we thought we'd come to the local pharmacy to see if they've got any lateral flow tests, but you don't need to go in to see that they're out of stock. So let's try this one. Staff suggested we go down the road to another pharmacy. Well, I got lucky. The pharmacist here does have a box of tests. He says, in fact, he gets a delivery every day, but as soon as people find out that he's got them, they can run out in half an hour just because of the sheer size of the demand for them. Eve Burke, a primary school teacher, has COVID along with her husband and 2 children. She's hoping to get back to work next Tuesday, but can't find any lateral flow tests.
I've been trying since yesterday, going onto the government website and refreshing hourly to get LFTs sent to our home because we can't go to a place to pick them up. And I've been messaging friends asking if anybody has any spare that they can drop off. But the issue is everybody is in the same position. And if they do have some LFTs at home, they're holding on to them themselves.
The government agency which manages tests says it has had to pause supply when demand is very high.
We do recognise that there are some difficulties across the country, both with pharmacies and with home testing requests. We do release and continuing to release test slots for individuals, and so they should just keep trying through the day. Obviously, as the Christmas period subsides, then the testing capacity should be more available to them. We do have good supplies and we will be endeavouring to get those to the right places.
But with infection rates expected to continue to soar, keeping up with demand for tests is likely only to get harder. Sophie Hutchinson, BBC News.
There's confusion this lunchtime on whether Britons who live in the European Union can drive through France to their homes elsewhere in the EU. Foreign Office officials are seeking urgent clarification from the French authorities after Eurotunnel warned that new regulations had come into effect. Our political correspondent Peter Saul joins us now. Can you unravel, Peter, what's going on?
I shall do my best. Yes, the French authorities introduced restrictions just before Christmas that said that unless you live in France or you have relatives there or you have a compelling reason, then you cannot enter the country. But one compelling reason, and this is still on the Minister for the Interior's website, is if you are travelling to another EU country where you happen to be resident. But both P&O and Eurotunnel are saying that following a French government decision, people from the UK can no longer travel through France because we are considered third country citizens having left the European Union. So, as you might imagine, this has caused plenty of confusion. The Foreign Office is stressing that as far as it is concerned, the UK has binding agreements with the European Union to allow transit through the various different countries there. And indeed, actually, already people have been blocked from getting on the Eurotunnel and getting on ferries. One, for example, did manage to get on the Eurostar through Belgium. Worth bearing in mind that diplomatic relations between France and the UK have not been particularly great recently. There have been rows over fishing rights, over the small boats crisis in the Channel too. But caught in the middle of all of this, really, are plenty of Brits who live on the continent, may well have been here visiting relatives over Christmas. And if they were travelling to go back to their home country via France, then their travel plans are rather in limbo.
Peter, thank you very much. Ministers in Scotland and Wales are warning people not to travel to England to take advantage of looser coronavirus restrictions on New Year's Eve. Nightclubs in Scotland and Wales are closed and tables in pubs, bars and restaurants are limited to 6 people. That's not the case in England, meaning some are contemplating crossing the border to celebrate. Well, our Consumer Affairs correspondent, Coletta Smith, is in Chirk, which is close to the Welsh border. Coletta, what have businesses there been telling you?
Well, the pub behind me bills itself as the last pub in England, and normally that makes very little difference at all, but at the moment on the English side, as you're saying, clubs can open, people can meet in much bigger groups for New Year's Eve. And that does make a difference because, unlike at other moments in the pandemic, people are free to travel. They're free to cross the border at the moment. So you can understand why lots of people may well be making this very short journey. Perhaps they'll have to be brave in the weather or maybe sensibly jumping in a taxi. And just crossing the border. This bridge marks one of the boundary points between England and Wales, that long winding border with lots of businesses almost looking at each other on either side. And you can see why people may well be tempted to cross over, particularly if they have reined back their plans over Christmas and feel like they're ready for a night out on New Year's Eve. Businesses on the Welsh side massively frustrated by that, feeling like after a very difficult Christmas trading season that this is potentially a moment to make a little more money, and they can see their customers being poached over to the other side. English businesses feeling like potentially they can cash in on a little bit of extra money here after a bad festive period. The Welsh First Minister has said that while it's not illegal to travel, it's against the spirit of the laws, but whether that will put people off is a different question.
Coletta, thank you very much. The former president of Afghanistan, Ashraf Ghani, has defended his decision to flee the country in August, saying his security forces had told him they could not protect him from the Taliban. Mr Ghani, who's now in exile in the UAE, told the BBC he understood why Afghans blamed him for the Taliban's swift takeover. Our chief international correspondent, Lise Doucette, reports.
Chaos in Kabul. The upheaval of August. Afghans fleeing for the airport when the Taliban swept in. Even President Ashraf Ghani, he slipped away secretly in a helicopter. In statements on social media, he said he did it to save Kabul and his life. Now he's spoken about that day and forces meant to protect him, the PPS.
What was your sort of memory of when you woke up that day?
On the morning of that day, I had no inkling that by late afternoon I will be leaving. Dr. Mohed, the National Security Advisor with the Chief of PPS, came and they said, PPS has collapsed. If I take a stand, they will all be killed. And they were not capable of defending me. And Dr. Mohed was literally terrified.
The US Congress, I think, has recently asked John Sopko, the US Inspector General for Afghanistan, to investigate allegations that when you left the country, a certain amount of money went with you.
I want to categorically state, I did not take any money out of the country. The helicopters in our first destination were available for everybody to search.
General Carter was also a key player in efforts to find a different way out of this war.
Do you think if you'd stayed, you'd have been able to get them to understand?
No, because unfortunately, I was painted in total black in all that came because we were never given the opportunity to sit down with them. It became an American issue, not an Afghan issue. They erased this.
There's a big what if What if the president had stayed? Many say a deal was all but done for an orderly transition. But once he left, the Taliban moved in. Either way, the Taliban were back. And many blame the president not just for what he did on August 15th, but what he didn't do in the months before.
The blame is totally understandable. What they rightly blame me for, they were totally right, is I trusted in our international partnership and pursued that path. All of us made a huge mistake in assuming that the patience of the international community would last.
What matters now? Afghanistan confronts the world's worst humanitarian crisis, in a world still struggling with the consequences of the Taliban takeover. Lise Doucette, BBC News.
The deal struck at last month's COP26 climate summit in Glasgow saw global leaders pledge to reduce carbon emissions and use less coal. But the commitments are not legally binding, so many campaigners, especially younger ones, are taking other legal action to make sure individual governments keep their environmental promises. Our Europe correspondent Nick Beake has been meeting some of the young activists.
I'm Sophia, I'm 16 years old. I'm Andre, I'm 13 years old, and we are suing 33 countries. It's pretty scary.
It's not a joke.
One family's effort for the global good. Brother and sister Andre and Sophia felt compelled to do something after devastating fires hit northern Portugal 4 years ago.
We actually saw people suffering and dying on TV, and not that far away from us.
In all, 66 people perished. Scientists say climate change will bring more of these violent episodes. The young Portuguese activists hope judges will rule that their right to life is being threatened by the 33 countries they're suing.
Even if we don't win, I think we set an example to other people that they can follow. So it's like a snowball effect that gets bigger and bigger.
Dutch climate campaigner Yveske van der Waal agrees a new direction's needed. She's hiked through the Netherlands during the pandemic, trying to drum up support, and argues the best path is now a legal one.
Because we feel now a lot of doors are shutting, we're taking it to the court. Because first, in the climate strikes, we yelled, what do we want? Climate justice, when do we want it now? That's the main thing we say. And now we're actually courageous enough to take it to the courts and hope that this door will stay open and actually accelerate the climate action that we need.
Just this summer, more than 200 people were killed in devastating floods in Europe, most in Germany. Nearly 6 months on, communities are struggling to rebuild, including here in Western Belgium.
As more lives are lost and more livelihoods ruined by extreme weather episodes, it feels like the momentum is shifting towards solutions that force politicians to act rather than waiting for them to deliver their promises. And there's a renewed effort to place their actions or inaction on the environment among the most serious crimes imaginable.
International lawyer Philippe Sands argues that a crime of ecocide, causing grave damage to the environment, should be introduced.
The person within government who takes that decision, it could be a prime minister, it could be a foreign secretary, it could be a president, could be individually responsible for the crime of ecocide. It works as a disincentive. The idea that you might spend time in prison, the idea that you might have to go through an individual criminal trial, that tends to concentrate the mind.
There's likely to be powerful political opposition to that plan. But young campaigners feel something must change to ensure environmental promises are finally honoured.
We are basically giving them a second chance to do the things that they said they will do, to keep their promises. I want them to think that this is like a second chance, not a threat, not an attack, an opportunity.
Nick Beake, BBC News.
The average price of a home in the UK has risen by more than 10% over the past year to a record of almost £255,000, according to Nationwide Building Society. More time spent working from home and a desire for extra space has prompted lots of families to make the decision to move house. According to another survey by the Halifax, Taunton in Somerset has seen house prices grow faster than anywhere else in the UK this year, as John Maguire explains.
Taunton is the county town of Somerset, finds itself right at the top of the charts when it comes to increases in house prices over the last year. 21.8%, that makes it the biggest increase in the country, the national average around 6%. So an average house here, £300,000 has gone up by £55,000 over the past 12 months. Why is the big question? Sarah Jane Bingham-Chick is from Savills. What's going on here?
Hello, John. Yes. So pre-COVID, Devon and Cornwall was very much the destination for the West Country, and we've seen COVID it's taught us to reevaluate our lives. People are looking for space, broadband, they're able to work from home more, so we're seeing a real drive out of London to the country, and Taunton is very much in the middle of the country.
And whenever we talk about those hot markets, about increases in house prices, you worry about people, first-time buyers, trying to get on that first rung of the housing ladder. Is that a problem here?
I would say not.
Okay.
I think it's still a very affordable place to live. If you look on the property portals, you will see that up to 200,000, from 100 to 200,000, there's plenty of property to buy. So it really is, it's a first-time buyer market. And when you look at the surround, for those that don't know where Taunton is, if you come out of London on the M4, hang a left at Bristol, we're about an hour down. And we are surrounded by beautiful countryside. We've got Exmoor National Park, we've got the Blackdown Hills, and just slightly to the north, we've got the Quantock Hills. Now, for those that don't know, Quantock Hills was the first designated area of outstanding natural beauty in 1956. So it really sets a tone for the surrounding countryside.
One of the reasons why it's so popular. Thank you very much indeed for your time this lunchtime. In contrast, some of the areas where we've seen decreases in house prices, for example, Westminster in London, a fall of 7% down. So that gives you an idea perhaps of some of the shifting changes in the UK housing market. Back to you.
The James Webb Space Telescope launched on Christmas Day and is starting to unfold its sun shield in a complex process involving hundreds of moving parts. All of the motors, pulleys and cables have to trigger at the right time and in the right order, or the telescope, which cost $10 billion and took 30 years to design and build, simply won't work. Our science editor, Rebecca Morell, has the story.
And liftoff. The moment of launch for an astronomy mission like no other, as the James Webb Space Telescope blasted off. Then the rocket casing opened up and the telescope was released into the darkness of space with a million-mile journey ahead. But as it travels, it has a fiendishly difficult task to do, unfolding.
It's so big, we didn't have any rocket that's big enough to launch it, fully deployed. So we had to build this telescope to be folded up to fit inside the rocket. This is really, really difficult engineering. But, NASA has never shied away from doing hard things. And so I have full confidence that it's going to work.
Unfurling the sun shield is the most difficult part of this process. It's enormous, the size of a tennis court. First, its two halves are lowered into position. Then the booms are deployed. The operation involves 400 pulleys, 400 metres of cabling and more than 100 release mechanisms that have to fire at exactly the right time. Finally, the material is pulled taut and the 5 layers of the sun shield, each as thin as a human hair, separate.
The whole process has been rehearsed again and again on Earth, but doing this in space will be nail-biting.
It's made of floppy material and it has to be held onto by a series of pins which release one by one, pull it out, make it tight, release another bit, pull it out again until slowly over days you pull out this tennis court sized object. So for many people working on the project, that's where the real nerves are.
The sun shield protects the telescope from the heat and light of the sun. The difference between the hot and cold sides is huge, 300 degrees Celsius. The telescope needs to operate in the coldest and darkest conditions to see the most distant stars.
For the first time, we'll be able to see all the way back to the time when these very first galaxies formed. And that will allow us to actually get images of them, verify that they are the very first galaxies. And then we can study how galaxies have evolved over the history of the universe.
The telescope could also offer a giant leap in our search for life, offering a close-up look at distant worlds beyond our own solar system.
Webb will also be able to probe the atmospheres of planets around other stars with far greater sensitivity and spectral resolution than we have been able to do to date. It will be a very important step to answering the question, do some of these exoplanets have the conditions to develop life like we know it? That's amazingly exciting to me.
The images that eventually come back from James Webb will be even more spectacular than these taken by Hubble. But there's still work to do. The sunshield will take several days to open, and that's just the start of this complex unfolding process. With so much at stake, it's a tense time for the team. Rebecca Morrell, BBC News.
Time for a look at the weather forecast, and Darren Bett has joined. She's taking us to the seaside.
Yeah, it's almost that sort of weather, really, Martine. It is exceptionally mild, and it may well be the mildest ever New Year's Eve and New Year's Day across the UK. We're keeping this very mild air, blustery winds, but it's where the winds are coming from that's important, because they're coming all the way from the Azores, from Madeira, from the south, bringing that warmth northwards into the UK, but bringing with it a lot of cloud. Having said that, the cloud has been a bit thinner today across some eastern parts of the UK, so there's been some weak winter sunshine around. It's much more cloudy out to the west, where we've seen some rain, and this rain is really gathering apace across Wales, heading into the northwest of England. That could push into parts of Northern Ireland and the southwest of Scotland by the end of the day. Very mild though, those temperatures at widely 12 to 15 degrees once again today. Now through this evening and overnight, that rain continues northwards, getting up into the central belt of Scotland. Some heavier rain for Northern Ireland too, and then we see this shorter, sharper burst of rain sweeping eastwards across England and Wales, driven on by some quite strong winds once again, and temperatures really won't drop an awful lot overnight. Another very mild night, except in the far north of Scotland, where we've got some clearer skies. A bit colder here. That rain soon clears away from East Anglia in the southeast tomorrow morning, and then for many parts of the country it'll brighten up, a little bit of sunshine perhaps. We've still got some rain now across central southern Scotland, Northern Ireland for a while, and the far north of England. It does tend to ease off, but these areas look like staying quite cloudy, and still on the cooler side across the northern parts of Scotland. But elsewhere, those temperatures again 13 to perhaps 16 or even 17 degrees towards the southeast and East Anglia. And if you're heading into the new year, seeing in the new year, could see a bit of rain arriving across some northern and western parts of the UK. Many places will be dry, but we've got those strengthening southerly winds as we head into New Year's Day. That's keeping it exceptionally mild. Now, with that windy weather on Saturday, New Year's Day, we could see a band of rain sweeping its way eastwards across the UK. Ahead of it, perhaps some sunshine, behind it brightening up, but some showers, the heavy ones holding off until later in Northern Ireland and western parts of Scotland. So a very mild day. Look at those temperatures on Saturday, 14 to 16 degrees. It's quite ridiculous, really. Things will start to change on Sunday, because that very mild air is heading in more into Europe, and instead the wind direction across the UK changes to more of a west or southwesterly. It's still mild, just not as mild. Maybe some sunshine on Sunday, but we're likely to find showers or longer spells of rain breaking out across more southern and eastern parts of the UK. And those temperatures on Sunday will be a few degrees lower, but it's still mild really for this time of the year. Martine.
It certainly is. Darren, thank you very much. That's all from the BBC News at 1, so it's goodbye from me. And on BBC One, we now join the BBC's news teams where you are.